Please welcome Mrs.
Thank you, Charles. Well, thanks very much, Charles. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I think my presence here is testimony to, or testament rather, to Charles' persistence, because he's talked to me for 2 or 3 years about coming here, and as much as I would have loved to come earlier, I really had a day job and a lot of things to do. And finally, when I announced my retirement, he came right away and said, "Now you cannot say no." So here I am. It's also, you know, the Kelley School is an indispensable source of talent for Eli Lilly. So I'm glad to have the opportunity for once to share something in return. And I hope it will be of at least some value. And I think it's what I'm going to be talking about. I hope it's very consistent with what you are teaching in this class. It's truly consistent with the current attitudes about global business strategy, and certainly in a large pharmaceutical firm like Eli Lilly. The issues involved today in global strategy are very different from the ones that would have applied in the not so distant past, and perhaps I call it the not so distant past so that I can avoid confronting the fact that I've been at it for almost 4 decades of this evolution of thinking in industry in general, at Lilly in particular. And for many of you, of course, 40 years is a distant past indeed. But I maintain that it is a relatively brief period in the grand scheme of things. And yet the changes are very large. When I arrived at Lilly, fresh out of business school in 1971, it was not a global company in any sense of the term as we understand it today. Yes, we had operations in many countries outside of the US. We did have about 1/3 of our sales which derived from countries outside of the US. We had manufacturing operations and in several overseas locations, not just sales and marketing. However, there were 3 major aspects of what we would now consider a global company which were missing. And let me suggest to you that these are global learning, true integration, and leverage. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. To me, the best proxy for evaluating the extent of global learning in a company is the makeup of its leadership. Are people with formative experiences outside of the firm's home culture actually rising to the top ranks of the business and therefore applying what they've learned, their diverse ways of thinking, to high-level decision-making? At Lilly and at many other large US companies, as recently as the 70s and the 80s, this simply was not the case. And today it is the case at Lilly. And maybe one of the best known examples perhaps in the company, but there are many others today. About 35 to 40% of our top 35 people in the company were born outside of the US, and 80% of that group of 35 top people have had experience outside of their home country. The second aspect of today's global company that is still quite new is true integration. And by that I mean not simply making products in diverse locations to supply local markets, but rather operating a supply chain that links widely dispersed operations into a seamless whole. And that is now the situation not only in pharmaceutical manufacturing, but also in R&D. And of course, it is the case in many other industries. Today, scientific teams at Lilly, whether they are exploring a particular molecule or targeting a certain disease state, often consist of individuals who physically work in labs on 3 different continents. And finally, leverage, a term that's very often overused in business jargon, but is truly meaningful in this case, in my view. Truly global companies look at strengths and opportunities in one country or region and figure out how these might help to mitigate problems in another part of the business. Such companies use their international experience as levers, quite literally, to ease their heavy lifting on otherwise vexing challenges. Again, this is quite new. My sense is that this third aspect of global strategy may be your primary focus in this course. And it takes us to the heart of what I want to share with you this evening. Please regard this as a case study of how one global company seeks to address its fundamental challenges using a global strategy plan. So let me talk a little bit about the industry. And I know a few of you who work at Eli Lilly are very closely associated with the company, so this is not going to be new information for those. But a fundamental transformation is underway in how the pharmaceutical industry operates today. And this transformation is driven by several major factors. Increasingly, R&D productivity across the industry has fallen. Last year, for example, the FDA approved 17 new molecular entities and 2 license applications for biologics. And that is the lowest number of approvals since 1983. If you take in total the last 5 years and compare with the previous 5 years in terms of number of product approvals, it has gone down for the industry as a whole by 40%. Meanwhile, R&D costs have continued their steady rise, and now they surpass considerably $1 billion per molecule which is approved for sale. And that cost includes both the cost of what we call the dry holes, or the products which fail during the development cycle, but also the time value of money, because it takes 12 to 15 years to develop and bring a product to market. A third problem is that a wave of patent expirations for top-selling products is beginning to crest across the entire industry. During 2011 and 2012 alone, the pharmaceutical industry will suffer about $40 billion in projected revenue losses. And it's already clear that new products will not be sufficient, will not be ready to replace all of those revenues. And finally, that's the fourth problem I want to talk about. Governments and other payers around the world, whether they are private or public, have been feeling great pressure from rising healthcare costs, and those come from the aging of populations in the developed world, from the access, for the first time in history, of hundreds of millions of people in the emerging markets to modern healthcare and pharmaceuticals, and also to access to more information, which means that people want to have access to the newest and latest and best. And so that has created pressures on payers who have been trying to relieve that pressure by reducing access and limiting prices, particularly for pharmaceuticals. Now, Albert Einstein is credited with defining insanity, and I quote him, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. When you consider the environment that I have just described, it becomes clear that pharmaceutical companies would be foolish, to the point of insanity perhaps, to continue doing things in the way that they have always done them. We need different results than what we've been achieving in the last decade, it's clear. Specifically, the pharmaceutical industry, in my view, needs to achieve 2 different things. One is to improve our productivity quite significantly, which means reducing costs throughout the value chain while accelerating our development of viable new molecules. And 2, we need to find ways to mitigate the financial risks of new product development. I mean, to give you an idea of those risks, and that's integrated in the $1 to $1.5 billion cost per molecule, but we start with about 5,000 chemical entities to get to one which gets to the marketplace. Even in the last stages, the clinical development, which is divided in 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, only about 11% of the products which enter that phase will make it to the market. And once the a product is approved, only 3 out of 10 actually recoup its development costs. So we depend completely on a few very large blockbuster drugs in order to pay for all the other failures in development or failures in the marketplace. So it's a very high-risk business, and we need to find ways to reduce those risks. So what I want to share with you is one of the most important ways in which we are transforming our business in order to achieve these needed improvements. Simply stated, Lilly will no longer try to do everything by ourselves. For most of Lilly's history, we've applied the model of what we call the fully integrated pharmaceutical company, or FIPCO. Under the FIPCO model, which all of Big Pharma adhered to, we believe that individual companies needed to own every part of development, manufacturing, and marketing of its products in order to bring innovative products to patients efficiently and at a high level of quality. At Lilly, we've created a new term to describe the structural model for the future that is now taking place, and we call it a fully integrated pharmaceutical network, or FIPNet. Our goal is still to be fully integrated, but not within one company. Instead, we seek to create a fully integrated global network that includes Lilly, but also other companies, organizations, and even individuals in some cases. These collaborators will not be owned or employed by Lilly, but nevertheless assembled, led, and managed by us. We are not alone in seeking this new model. Many of our competitors are starting to build new kinds of relationships outside of their own walls, but I believe that Lilly has been a pioneer, and certainly we are, if you will, articulating this strategy in a way that is probably a little bit more comprehensive than what I've seen from our competitors. Some of the example of pioneering work. As recently as 5 years ago, virtually all of Lilly's synthetic chemistry took place inside our company at Lilly's laboratories, involving Lilly scientists. Today, while all of Lilly's drug discovery compounds are designed internally by Lilly scientists, a high percentage of the compound are now synthesized outside of our walls. Today, such work on Lilly's behalf is mostly concentrated in a Chinese firm called ChemExplorer, which was created only about 5 years ago and has now something like 300 scientists, very high level. And this is about 20% of all of our chemistry work in the company globally. Also, just a few years ago, virtually all of the people engaged in achieving what we call proof of concept for Lilly's discoveries were Lilly employees, working again at Lilly-owned facilities with Lilly-owned tools. Proof of concept is the point at which clear evidence has been obtained that a drug compound actually works in humans. It's not unusual for a pharmaceutical company to spend about $30 million and spend about 3 years while engaging hundreds of its own scientists to achieve this proof of concept for a single compound. Today, a Lilly program known as CHORUS has demonstrated that proof of concept can be achieved by using a global network of scientists and other partners who are outside the walls of the company, reducing costs by several $1 million per molecule, while also reducing the time required for development. And I've seen one estimate that currently we can do this for $5 instead of $30 million per compound. Even more recently, pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies faced one of two choices with regard to their discoveries in their pipeline. Either they could accept the large financial risk that went along with continuing the development of that compound, with no assurance of ultimate success, obviously, or they could abandon and sell off their discoveries. Today, decisions about our pipeline are still very difficult, but at Lilly we have a third option. So we're working with several firms in China and India particularly that have been willing to share our financial risk in development in exchange for payment when important positive milestones are achieved and for royalties if the product makes it all the way to market. These firms are investing their own human and financial resources to develop our drugs, therefore sharing our costs and risks. So this third way, we believe, will allow Lilly to move actually more molecules in our pipeline simultaneously, more quickly and at less cost, to the point at which their viability in the marketplace can be assessed with greater confidence, at which time we bring these products back into development and marketing by ourselves and share some of the rewards with our partner. It is significant, I believe, that one of the most mature examples of FIPNet at Lilly involves one of our most important molecules, and it's a compound that you may have seen in the paper. It's called Prasugrel. It is currently being considered for approval by the FDA. It's our, hopefully, next big blockbuster. Prasugrel is an oral antiplatelet agent that we are investigating as a potential treatment for patients with acute coronary syndrome. It will be competing with the product which is currently the second product in the pharmaceutical industry worldwide, Plavix, which has sales of about $8 billion, so a very significant product. So Prasugrel originated in the labs of a Japanese partner called Daiichi Sankyo. Beyond our two companies, a third party manufactures the active ingredient for Prasugrel. As we develop the drug in clinical trials, both a clinical research organization and an academic research organization have been involved in our major trials. And on the commercial side, once we get the product to the market, it is quite possible that the contract sales organization will be involved, in addition to the sales forces of Lilly and Daiichi Sankyo, if Prasugrel is approved for sale. So this is a comprehensive example of a networked relationship requiring extensive integration, as you can imagine. At its heart, and this is my strong personal belief, the pursuit of innovation is about harnessing human talent in all its forms. Skills, certainly, but also new ideas, intense dedication and hard work, and also passion. And FIPNet, at its heart, is about harnessing all these forms of human talent on a global scale, more flexibly and efficiently than has ever been possible in the life sciences. So the most basic factor enabling FIPNet is simply the availability of talent. The success of higher education in places such as India and China, combined with the enormous populations in these countries, has created talent pools, the likes of which have never been seen in human history. But what had been missing, and particularly in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology fields in these countries until recently, was the element of experience, familiarity with the complex R&D and manufacturing systems in our industries, not to mention the stringent quality requirements and the highly specific expectations of regulators, is not something that can be learned typically at university. It comes only from years of experience. And I would add that in those two countries, higher education, or education in general, tends to be very strong on the conceptual side and a little less on the practical applied side. But beginning in the early part of this decade and accelerating now with each passing year, the phenomenon of the returnees has injected experience into the talent pools of China and India in particular. Many native-born people who have spent a decade or more working in the global pharmaceutical industry are now going home to seize opportunities for entrepreneurship, enjoy a higher level of professional challenge, or simply reconnect with their families and old friends. So both within Lilly and among our partners, the returnees have been crucial to the spread of FIPNet. Just as crucial has been the progress in these countries towards greater respect for intellectual property. Innovators will clearly shy away from even the most attractive talent pools if the knowledge they share or the discoveries that they might make with this talent is not reasonably secure. Legal regimes to protect patents still have far to go in China and in India, particularly with regard to enforcement. But we are seeing much greater commitment to the core principles. India has adopted, finally, a patent law 3 years ago, and they have a pretty good judiciary system, so we are optimistic that over time the respect for intellectual property will be appropriately enforced in India. In China, the problem is different. I think the central government has really understood the importance of intellectual property to the development of the country and of knowledge-based industries in the country. But the enforcement is handled through provincial governments and through the court system, which tend to be corrupt. And so we hope that over time this will change. It's very important for the development of China. It's very important for the development of our own operations in China and with partners. Other factors have been essential to making FIPNet possible as well. It is no coincidence that Lilly was the first US pharmaceutical company to create a venture capital fund dedicated to China, which we did last year. The growth of venture funding, combined with the entrepreneurship of the returnees, is creating hothouses for new business development in places like Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Beijing. I was just in March speaking to the Shanghai Biopharmaceutical Industry Association, and in the presence of many entrepreneurs, and so this young man who is about 40 years old and has created his pharmaceutical company, and he's now worth $500 million, and that's in 5 years. The opportunities are there. And so the impediments to making the fullest and best use of the world's largest talent pools are falling away. And that is the essence, again, of FIPNet, or enabling this concept. Now, to take full advantage of that concept, however, we must address several concerns about the networked model of operations in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries. Some people argue that this model is nothing more than a means of disguising the pursuit of cheap labor at the expense of the existing life science workforces in Europe, the US, and Japan. And that, if that were true, then the benefits of FIPNet would be short-lived indeed. In fact, to the extent that FIPNet is successful as a means of obtaining high-quality work and sharing financial risk, then it is almost certain that the labor will get steadily more expensive. That is the nature of free markets. And we are seeing this in spades today in China and in India, where the salary inflation is extremely high, as you probably know. It is more accurate to acknowledge that if we do not transform the industry, and especially if we do not find more efficient and far-reaching ways to engage talent in the service of human health, then existing jobs truly will be in jeopardy. Some people also point out that FIPNet exposes companies to the potential erosion of their product quality and their core capabilities, as they rely more and more on the work of outsiders. This concern should not be dismissed lightly, especially in the light of scandals involving heparin in China and several others. In particular, experienced companies at the center of new collaboration models must assure that their safety and quality requirements are understood and applied by all partners. We, as partners of these companies, have a very important responsibility to ensure, since we put our brand in their hands, that they abide by the same standards and the same quality standard as we do, and we need to train them and audit their work. This may well serve to accelerate the global proliferation of the higher standards in ways that the regulatory bodies alone could never achieve. At the same time, we must not neglect the FIP part of FIPNet. This model is not about the frantic outsourcing of all work. Instead, it emphasizes the integration of external networks to a previously unheard of degree. Such integration, in turns, requires a retention of core knowledge and skills and the creation of new expertise and value in the management of complex networks. Lilly's R&D operations in Singapore provide an excellent example. Our Singapore Center for Drug Discovery is really the nerve center of our emerging global FIPNet in systems biology. Lilly could not manage this network without strong in-house expertise in toxicology, in drug disposition, in process research and development, and other key functions. And that is in addition to the information systems and other Lilly-owned tools that we are developing to integrate a network of partners spanning 4 continents. So what I'm talking about is really that you should not give away your core capabilities, but actually focus on those which are important to managing this network, creating new ones in the process. Ultimately, the great uncertainty of FIPNet is not what we might lose, but rather what we might gain, and whether we are capable, thank you, of transforming ourselves in such a way as to take these gains on board. Let me explain what I mean. Realizing the full potential of FIPNet will require Lilly and other companies that pursue this model to transform their own cultures. We will need to develop more courage. Setting up a wholly owned overseas affiliate is a relatively stress-free undertaking compared with entrusting significant portfolio assets to a young company on the other side of the world, led by people who were recently the employees of your arch competitors. And I'm talking about a real-life situation that we are facing today at Lilly. We will also need to develop more humility. Yes, our own expertise is crucial, and we will be called upon to teach our networked partners constantly. But we will also be called upon to listen and to learn. Big Pharma urgently needs to find new ways of getting things done, and the new ways are more likely to originate with people who did not spend their careers living with the old ways. And we will need to develop also more of a stake in the success of others. Again, FIPNet is not an undertaking for which our expenditures should be purely seen as costs. As I've said, one thing that distinguishes FIPNet from traditional subcontracting is the role of venture capital in many cases and many various risk-sharing arrangements. So the network will be stronger and more effective to the extent that Lilly and similar companies recognize their own gain from the success of their partners. Now, I've been talking about the new attitudes and behaviors that we will need to develop to help FIPNet succeed. Let me conclude, however, by talking about something that must not change. At Lilly and among many other large companies that develop globally integrated networks, we must guard against weakening our own brand, especially our reputation for ethical conduct and our values. And indeed, this is the one area in which it is appropriate for us to transfer to our partners our old beliefs and business standards, spreading them throughout the network. I believe that FIPNet, or whatever one chooses to call this approach, is part of a highly optimistic vision of the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries. As societies grow older throughout much of the world, the demand for medicines will continue to expand. At the same time, the great progress of science, as the secrets of the human genome are slowly but steadily being unlocked, will permit the products we offer in the future to be safer, to be more effective, and to be more precisely tailored to the kinds of patients who will benefit from them. This, in turn, will elevate the value of medicines and ease the pressure on market access and pricing that our companies currently face. Currently, when we develop products, they do not work on 100% of the patients who take them. They work on 20% of the patients for some disease areas, up to 80% in others. On average, it's only half. By tailoring our medicines much more to the genomic and other characteristics of patients, we will be able to change that value proposition and move that 50% to 70, 80, 90, 100% in some cases. And therefore, the benefit to cost ratio for the payers will be improved significantly, not to speak about the tremendous human benefit of taking a product that actually works for you and from which you don't suffer from side effects. There is only one truly essential requirement of this vision, namely the application of human ingenuity on a global scale. In other words, the global strategy play is the one that matters most. This is certainly not a modest requirement, but it is an attainable requirement, in my view. It is attainable, I believe, once companies and other organizations in healthcare manifest the courage, the humility, and the self-confidence to collaborate as a matter of course. You need not call it FIPNet, but please consider that open, collaborative, and truly global relationships are good for business, and in our case, good for patients. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. It's about FIPNet, but let me add that anything is fair game for our discussion. After almost 40 years in this business, I've learned a few things about business in general, and so I'll be delighted to get your questions. And if they get too difficult, I'll ask Ricky Pay to help me.